Welcome to Dark Corners with David Allen Voyles. Dark Corners is brought to you by Gestalt Media, an independent publishing company dedicated to serving independent artists. Dark Corners is a horror podcast and may not be suitable for all listeners, therefore discretion is advised. Season 2 consists of episodes written and narrated by David Allen Voyles, based on a story suggested by the Halloween-themed musical work Witchworks, created by dark ambient musician Mombi Yuleman. The 13th episode concludes the season in October of 2020. Chapter 4. Bad Apple. As Laura and Daniel walked along the path to the factory ruins, Laura gestured at the golden five-petaled flowers and said, "Those yellow flowers are really pretty. They look kind of like the squash plants I always grew in my old garden. But why would squash be growing way out here?" "You're not far off," Daniel said. "They're pumpkins. Deidre and I would throw our jack-o'-lanterns out here each November after Halloween. We threw the pumpkin guts out here too, and as you can see, it created quite a pumpkin patch. We never had to buy our pumpkins, and neither did any of our friends." "You didn't have to tend them?" Laura asked. "Never. They just volunteered every year. Kind of spooky in a way, like they were begging to be used every Halloween. There were enough to provide jack-o'-lanterns for everybody we knew." The couple had stopped to look out over the vast network of vines covered in big green leaves and bright orange-yellow blooms that stretched out on both sides of the path. When Daniel remained silent without resuming their walk, Laura turned to look at him. "Not so good memories?" He smiled. "Nah, they're mostly good. I was just remembering how creepy it was to come out here, especially at dusk, when there were pumpkins everywhere. You could hear rustling in the leaves, and as the light faded, you could almost convince yourself that the pumpkins already had faces on them. Not the cute little triangle eyes and nose either, really scary ones." A sudden rustling made them both jump. The swaying and shaking of the leaves revealed the movements of something racing through the undergrowth near them. The rustling stopped abruptly, and a black cat emerged onto the path with what looked like a small gray and black mottled object in its mouth, with appendages that writhed and twitched. "What's it got?" Daniel asked. "Maybe a starfish? This far from the ocean? Looks more like a..." Daniel stopped speaking to peer more closely at the cat. "Like what?" "Like a small hand." The cat stared back at the couple and then darted back into the cover of the pumpkin plants with its prize. "What the hell?" Laura looked at Daniel in astonishment. "On second thought, it couldn't have been a hand," Daniel said. "Whatever it was definitely moving, alive. Must have been some kind of rodent, a mole or a rat, maybe a mother with babies clinging to it, or a couple of small snakes." "Ew. You can stop guessing any time now. I'm going to go with starfish." She shuddered and rubbed her arms as if to slough off the experience like old skin. "Let's get on up to the toy factory. This place is creeping me out now." "I'm glad you suggested the idea of a picnic," Daniel said, taking her hand as they resumed their walk. "Kind of lightens the atmosphere a bit, considering the last time we were here." "Well, it's not a full picnic, just some wine, cheese and crackers, and fruit. I've been looking forward to coming back here. What we heard before, the footsteps and the baby crying, I feel pretty sure that was a residual haunting, something important in the past that happened at the factory, and I'd like to know how often that scene plays out." The crumbling walls of the building they were discussing began to come into view as they got closer. "I have to say, I'm finding that I'm more curious than ever about this place," said Daniel. "I never gave that much thought to it as a kid, but my father was always intrigued with it. Maybe that's why I resisted it. But since experiencing that," he hesitated, searching for the right word, "whatever it was that we heard, well, I'd like to figure out what's going on." I mean, my grandfather did work here. Maybe that was him. The couple picked their way over the broken concrete in front of the entrance, and Laura sought out a relatively clean place where she could lay out their light meal. She rested the basket on a small iron bench and sat down beside it. Daniel followed suit and pulled the wine bottle out of the basket. Laura handed him a wine opener and said, "I think it's quite possible that it was your grandfather we heard, but it's hard to say for sure. If I'm right, and the haunting is residual, it might just be that we're experiencing a replay of an event that occurs over and over." "Like a film clip set on a loop cycle," Daniel said as he pulled the cork from the bottle. "Exactly. But that doesn't rule out the possibility that there could be an intelligent haunting going on here as well." "Intelligent?" Daniel asked with a grin. He filled their glasses half full. "I'd hope so. I'd hate to think we have stupid ghosts around here." "You know what I mean. Spirits who are active and aware, not just a leftover image or sound from the past." Laura pulled out a box of crackers and spread brie on one, which she handed to Daniel. As she fixed another for herself, she added, "It could be that your presence here did evoke the spirit of your grandfather. Maybe he has unfinished business that somehow involves you." "Then why didn't he speak to me? Why did he just walk down the steps and then go back up to go in that office on the mezzanine?" "Don't know," Laura said as she wiped a crumb from her lips. "That's what we're here to find out." She took a sip of wine and then said, "Apple slices would go well with this. You mind cutting up one for us?" Daniel eagerly reached into the basket, but withdrew his hand even faster as he yelped in pain. "What's wrong?" Laura asked, frowning in concern as Daniel held his left hand and stared at one of the fingers that was already bleeding badly. "Oh my God, what happened?" She grabbed a napkin from the basket and wrapped Daniel's finger. "Something cut me. What kind of arsenal have you got in there?" "Just a knife, but it's in a case," Laura said, looking in the basket. "Oh, shit." "What?" Daniel asked, turning his gaze from his hand to the basket where Laura was carefully retrieving something. Slowly she held up an apple with the bloody edge of a razor blade sticking out. "How in the hell did this get in here?" she asked, her eyes wide. Daniel stared in disbelief, and yet it was all too easy to believe it. He had not truthfully explained the Band-Aid he had worn for a week on a finger on his right hand, but he knew he would need to tell her about it now. "This isn't the first time that's happened to me," he said slowly. Laura frowned again. "What do you mean?" "I got cut from a razor and an apple about 2 weeks ago. But this hand." "Yeah, I remember. But you said a knife slipped while you were slicing a bagel." "I lied," Daniel stated flatly. He stared at the apple rather than looking at Laura. "The truth was just so weird I didn't feel like telling you." "So what did happen?" "Remember that night we had dinner and you came back to the farm for a while?" Laura nodded and smiled. "Well, later, I had this weird dream. A nightmare, really. Terrifying. I was helping my father put up jars of fruit in the cellar, but he was yelling at me for not doing it right, as usual. And then..." Daniel paused and took a breath. "Then I saw all kinds of weird stuff in the jars. Eyes, fingers, gross stuff. And then all the jars erupted with thousands of spiders." "That is terrifying," Laura said, resting her hand on his arm. "But that wasn't all. My father kept talking, saying what a terrible son I was. A bad apple." He paused again and looked Laura in the eye. "I woke up scared to death and turned on the light beside my bed. But then, sitting there on the nightstand at the base of the lamp, was an apple. An apple with razor blades in it." Laura squinted as she studied Dan carefully. "I didn't put it there," he said defensively. "Then how do you think it did get there?" "I hadn't a clue. But I know I didn't put it there." Laura sat silently, looking at him. "Damn it, Laura, I didn't put it there." "I didn't say you did." But I know what you're thinking, being a psychologist and all. You're thinking I subconsciously put the bladed apple on the nightstand and also put another one in the basket somehow. Daniel, I don't know what to think yet. Why don't we go over all the possibilities? What you just said, that you subconsciously put both apples in harm's way, is one possibility. But let's think about what else is possible. Well, if we're talking possibilities, you could have left the first apple on the nightstand somehow before you left my house that night. And you wouldn't have noticed that when you went to bed? Laura asked, her tone indicating her doubt. It's possible. You said let's list the possibilities. Okay, right. It's possible, even if not probable, Laura agreed. And I could have easily put the bladed apple in the basket, that's true. Daniel nodded. Laura tilted her head, narrowed her eyes, and asked, Are you thinking that's what happened? That I'm setting these booby traps for you? I sure as hell don't want to think that, Daniel said, but it's possible, 'cause I know I didn't do it. Why would I do that? What would be my motive? I don't know. To make me think I'm cracking up? To make me dependent on you for some reason? Laura nodded. Yeah, okay. That is theoretically possible. I still call the idea of you not seeing the apple before you went to bed a stretch, but I'll grant you that your scenario is possible. But let's keep going. What else might be possible? Besides me doing it all subconsciously? Yeah. Well, that somebody snuck into my house while I was asleep and put the apple on my nightstand, and then snuck into your house today and put another apple in this basket after you had already packed it. Pretty far-fetched. Agreed, Laura said, although somebody could have maybe put it in the basket when it was in the car in my driveway, but still, the motive for a third party to do that is far-fetched. Well, that leaves us in an awkward place, Daniel said. The most plausible explanation is that one of us is a sick motherfucker. I don't think we've covered all the possibilities, Laura said. Daniel gave her a puzzled look. I'm not ready to dismiss the paranormal in all this. A ghost? Laura shrugged. I'm inclined to believe that. I know we haven't known each other long, but you haven't shown me any signs of the kind of psychosis that would have to be in play for you to be torturing yourself this way. She took his hand and unwrapped the bloody napkin to examine his wound as she continued to talk. She pulled the bottle from the basket and, holding his hand away from their clothes, poured some of the red wine over his wound. So, which of the possibilities seem most believable to you? The most logical one, since I don't believe that I put the apples there, is that somehow you set me up. Laura's lips tightened as she used the knife to rip a clean piece from the napkin which she wrapped around his wine and blood-stained finger. Is that what you believe happened? She looked at him intently. Daniel returned her gaze just as intently before answering. No, I don't. Laura let out her breath in a sigh of relief. That makes me feel a lot better. She brought his hand to her lips and kissed the wrapped finger lightly. But it still leaves us in a pretty odd place. You've got a stalker of some sort, but whether living or dead is a big question. A crack of thunder made them both jump, and heavy drops of rain began to fall. Daniel grabbed the wine and cheese and threw it into the basket. Laura grabbed the basket as they stood, and they ran to the back of the factory where the roof could protect them from the downpour that was already beginning to soak their clothes. Although sunset was still hours away, the storm darkened the sky so that the decayed structure began to look as ominous as it had on the evening of their first visit. Flashes of lightning immediately followed by long, loud rolling thunder occurred less than a minute apart. Soon large pellets of hail bounced on the broken floor of the factory, so many that the portion of the exposed floor quickly turned white. Well, this definitely was not in the forecast, Daniel said. He felt he had to raise his voice to be heard over the heavy rain and hail, even though he and Laura were standing beside each other. Another flash of lightning made them flinch and brace for the ear-splitting round of thunder. "At least we weren't on the trail," Laura said after the boom had faded. Daniel nodded and then looked around for a place where they might sit and wait out the storm. A long table where employees of the Black Cat Toy Factory years ago might have enjoyed their work breaks still stood. Daniel grabbed a long bench that rested upside down against a wall and placed it at the table, set the basket down, and pulled the wine back out. "Might as well enjoy ourselves," he said. Laura found the glasses, and Daniel poured them each another glass and set the bottle back on the table rather than returning it to the basket. "Kind of fun, if you ignore the fact that there might be a ghost in here that wants to kill me." "We don't know that it wants to kill you. Maybe it just wants to get your attention." "Mission accomplished." "And we don't know that there's only one ghost involved here." "Oh, great." The hail lessened and then stopped. And although the rain also decreased in intensity, it still came down at a steady rate with no sign of stopping soon. The roof, which was the floor of the mezzanine under which they had taken refuge, kept most of the rain off them, but large puddles were already forming in many places. The sound of the dripping from the office floor above them with the steady rainfall was a rich tapestry of sound that Daniel couldn't help but enjoy. He had always found the sound of rain comforting as a boy. But then something else caught his ear. "Did you hear that?" he said in a soft voice. Laura shook her head. "I thought I heard a door open." He stood up and walked out toward the open area of the factory, stopping before he reached the rainfall. Laura followed and stood beside him. In addition to the constant dripping, the ringing sound of footsteps above them on the metal mesh walkway was unmistakable. Laura nodded and whispered, "It's happening again." The footsteps above them moved away from them, stopped, then came back towards them again, but this time moved on past the point where Laura and Daniel had first heard them. When the clanging steps seemed to have reached as far down the walkway as they could go without beginning a trek towards the front of the building, they stopped again, and as before, came back to where they had first started, right above them. Laura questioned Daniel silently with raised eyebrows, but he just shook his head and shrugged. A low voice spoke, almost lost in the sound of the rain. "You've come at last." Glass shattered behind them, making them both whirl around to see what threat might have appeared, their hearts in their throats. The wine bottle was smashed to pieces on the floor beside the table. A blur of black movement made them both look beyond the table, and suddenly they saw green eyes glowing in the gloom. The black cat they had seen earlier sat on a broken slab of concrete looking at them. "This can't be good," Daniel said. "It doesn't seem frightened by us." Laura moved toward the cat, which continued to sit still as she approached. "Hey, fellow," she said gently to the cat. "What are you doing here? Are you trying to tell us something?" The cat stood and moved towards the open area of the factory, but then angled off toward the outer wall. It stopped, turned back to look at Daniel and Laura, and then continued on further, staying under the protection of the mezzanine that ran halfway down each of the side walls. When it had gone another 20 feet, it stopped and turned back again. "It's waiting for us. It wants us to follow it," Laura said, moving toward the cat. "What could possibly go wrong?" Daniel said, shaking his head but following her. When they got closer, the cat started moving away again, looking back briefly to see if they were following. It continued on to the second of 4 alcoves that ran along each side of the factory, large areas where different stages of toy manufacture likely occurred. Broken tables, benches, and remnants of unidentifiable machinery were scattered about the room. As there were similar alcoves above them on the second floor, Laura and Daniel were protected from the rain, but large water stains covered the walls so that their original color was impossible to identify, and the room smelled strongly of mold. Trash covered the room so that they had to pick their way through to follow the cat, which led them to a far corner where it sat and licked its tail briefly, and then it dashed off in the direction of where they had first seen it. "Guess we're supposed to look for something over here," Laura said. "Hope you've had your tetanus shots," Daniel said as he kicked tentatively with the toe of his boot at broken boxes, clumps of soiled, moldy fabric, and small, rusted pieces of metal that might have once been parts of toy cars and mechanical robots. He found a long metal pipe with a smaller pipe at the end, coming off at a 90-degree angle that he could use to rake the debris around. "Whoa, this looks like something," he said after only a little bit of poking around. He used the pipe to hook large pieces of wet cardboard and pull them away from the corner. Even in the dim light, they could make out the stained, dirty bones. Daniel raked the surfaces of other piles of trash, and every time it was the same. Underneath, there were bones. Hundreds of bones. Femurs, finger bones, rib cages, and skulls. Different sizes, but all of them, most certainly, of children. That concludes this episode of Dark Corners with David Allen Voyles. Music for Dark Corners was written and performed by Mombi Yuleman and can be purchased at mombiyuleman.bandcamp.com. For my latest projects, you can always find information at my official website, davidallenvoyles.com. And I invite all of you to join our Dark Corners Facebook group, where you can find background information on posted stories, previews of upcoming stories, and all kinds of other dark content. Hope we meet again soon in the Dark Corners.